Raskolnikov woke up in his cramped rented room after a sleepless night haunted by the tragedies of a family crushed by hunger and poverty. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling that seemed to have collapsed during the night. The morning light brought no warmth to the room. It only highlighted the peeling yellow wallpaper, hanging in sickly strips, and the thick layer of dust that silently covered the books he no longer had the heart to read. He lay completely still on the torn sofa, wrapped in his heavy student overcoat. He hadn't undressed. Taking off his clothes had become too much effort for him. He lay there, gazing at his room, and found a strange, sickly peace in it. When a man has completely given up, even the dirt on the wooden floor feels like a friend. He had buried himself alive. Suddenly, the door burst open without hesitation, and a figure appeared. It was Nastasia, the cook from downstairs. She carried a cracked teapot and slammed it down on the table along with 2 pitiful lumps of yellowish sugar. She was a simple woman. She stood in front of Raskolnikov to tell him about the desperate situation he was facing. "The landlady is about to report you to the police," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You haven't paid her, and you refuse to leave this room." Raskolnikov didn't look at Nastasia. He just frowned at the peeling yellow wallpaper and muttered hoarsely. His jaw clenched. "Report me to the police." Really? She really is an idiot. Nastasia gave a small, pitying laugh. She looked at the young man who used to be a respectable tutor, now lying in the shadows like a discarded sack of flour. "Why do you just lie there?" she asked, genuinely confused. "What? Are you waiting for money to fall from the sky?" Raskolnikov lifted his head. The deadness in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a burning, feverish fire. "That's right," he whispered so quietly that the hairs on Nastasia's arms stood up. "I'm waiting for a fortune."
Nastasia took a step back. She decided it was time to leave, but as her hand touched the doorknob, she remembered something. "There's a letter for you. You'll need to pay the postman 3 kopecks." The moment he heard the word letter, the young man seemed to crumble. His eyes filled with overwhelming anxiety. He frantically dug into his pocket like a drowning man clawing at the surface of the water. His hands trembled violently until his cold fingers finally clutched the few small coins he had left. He begged her to go get the letter for him, his breath catching in his throat. When she returned and left him alone with the envelope, the silence of the room rushed back, heavier than before. He picked up the letter but didn't open it right away. He stood in the dim gray light, staring at the small, slanted handwriting. It was his mother's writing, the same hands that had once taught him his first letters had written these lines. He pressed the envelope to his lips, touching them to the ink, and suddenly felt a wave of horror at what lay inside. With the instinct of a hunted animal, he knew this piece of paper was about to destroy his miserable, quiet refuge. When he finally broke the seal, the room seemed to shrink around him. The pages were densely covered, written from edge to edge in the small, frantic handwriting of a mother carrying the weight of endless tragedy. She wrote about his sister, Dounia. She described the horrors Dounia had endured, the drunken, groping hands of her employer, the insane, jealous rages of the man's wife that were poured onto Dounia. Then Dounia was thrown onto a peasant's cart in pouring rain and driven out of town like a piece of rotting meat. She even wrote about how the whole town had chewed up their family name and cursed every member of their family. Reading this, Raskolnikov could almost feel the freezing rain on his sister's skin and the burning shame on his own cheeks.
But then the tone of the letter changed. A bright, almost horrifying joy spread through his mother's words. A savior had appeared. Dounia was about to marry a man named Luzhin, a rich, practical government official. Every following sentence revealed his mother's quiet desperation as she tried to convince her son, and perhaps herself, that this was a blessing. She made excuses for the man's arrogance. She struggled to justify the cruel joke Luzhin had made, that he specifically wanted a poor bride, so she would spend her whole life crying with gratitude at his feet. Words don't always match actions, she pleaded from the page. It was probably just a joke. And then came a cruel miracle. Luzhin was moving to Petersburg. He needed a secretary. With his deep pockets, he could hire a talented young law student. "You are our only hope," she wrote. "Dounia was dreaming about your future. If you was happy, they would be happy too." When the last page slipped from his fingers, he realized he was crying. He collapsed onto the thin pillow. His heart pounded violently in his chest. He wasn't a fool. He could see clearly that this miracle was nothing but a cruel trap waiting to lock him inside. This wasn't a miracle. This was a sacrifice. His beautiful, intelligent sister was willingly stepping onto the auction block, selling her pride and her body to an arrogant tyrant, just to buy a future for her brother. And, by doing it out of love, they had tied his hands. They had left him no honorable way to say no. Slowly, the wet warmth on his cheeks began to dry. The sadness didn't disappear. It hardened into a cold, jagged iron bar deep in his stomach. A slow, terrible smile spread across his pale face. The yellow walls pressed in on his shoulders, the ceiling scraped against his skull. There was no air left in the room. Everything spun before his eyes. He stepped out of the shabby room without hesitation. He no longer cared about the landlady, the police, or the rent. He rushed down the stairs, pushed open the front door, and threw himself into the deafening roar of the Petersburg streets. He walked straight toward the only terrible door still open to him.